Hey everyone, I'm your host Cadence, and welcome back to another episode of Project Honesty. This is a podcast by a young adult, for young adults, to acquire unfiltered advice and bold opinions, as well as take deep dives into the issues shaping our world. We'll challenge ideas, explore new perspectives, and have fun while navigating the ups and downs of life. This is Project Honesty, where truth meets curiosity and every conversation matters. If you haven't already, go check out last week's episode called The Canadian Current, an update on the Canadian government. In this episode, we are going to discuss the current political landscape in Canada, from who the heck our new PM is, to what the Liberals promise with their new policies. We are diving into what this new government is promising to Canadians, as well as how they're handling the new challenges with US-Canada relations. Tune in to learn more now. That is available on Spotify and YouTube. And if you aren't being updated on our Instagram, which I highly recommend you follow, that's where we give topic releases, thought-provoking Thursdays, other really cool, important things. It's project_honesty24. That is where you find out weekly topics. Today's topic is current events. So I've chosen 3 big events to focus on, plus I've added a section in here called Quick News, which is just short little things about what's going on in the world. So one of the main events we're going to be talking about today is the US-Iran conflict over nuclear powers in the Middle East. What is happening, why it's happening, and why did the US feel the need to get involved? Topic 2 is the new Canadian Land Resource and Economic Policies, or better known as Bill C-5, that was actually passed as I was recording this. We're going to talk about what is Bill C-5, what's its purpose, and what are Indigenous communities saying about this bill, and why are they opposing it. And then number 3 is about the No Kings protest in the US and what this signals about the political tensions in America. When and why did the No Kings protest happen? What were they protesting? What does this event signal about the rising societal opposition to the political administration in America right now? Those are the 3 main events. Before I get into that, we're going to do some quick news. So first point in quick news is that Candace Owens, in an interview with English journalist Piers Morgan, admitted she is embarrassed by the fact that she told people to vote for Trump, stating that Trump is a, quote, chronic disappointment, and that, quote, the picture of politics in America is going to look very different because of his actions. I've talked about this I think I talked about it a couple episodes ago. I don't necessarily know which one, but I said the fact that Candace Owens is pointing out that this administration is wrong should tell you how bad Trump is fucking up. If Candace Owens, who's like diehard Trumpy over here, is saying that he's a chronic disappointment, it shows you how incredibly bad this situation has got. Like, if you did not know Candace Owens prior to comments like this, good. But she was a diehard lover of Trump. Now she's backpedaling on all those comments, which is kind of nice to see. And then a Canadian citizen by the name of Johnny Noviello died whilst in ICE custody in Florida. The situation is currently still under investigation, but there is national uproar about his death. And then number 3 in quick news is Anna Wintour resigns as Vogue's longstanding editor-in-chief, but continues to remain the head boss at Vogue. That's insane. I remember knowing Anna Wintour. I mean, I don't know her. Who am I? I remember hearing about Anna Wintour as editor-in-chief for Vogue forever, and resigning from that, I think, is a big sign of something. I don't know what, but, I mean, she's still running shit. She's still being a girl boss, so, I mean, good for her. All right, so that was quick news. We are going to hop into our 3 top stories for today. So first, I want to talk about the US versus Iran conflict. So talks of US strikes to Iranian nuclear facilities started back in April, where Trump proposed that the US and Iran strike a deal around nuclear energy. But this deal had to be made on Trump's terms, which was a 60-day period to reach a finalized deal. So around right now, mid-June, is when Trump wanted this deal to be made. Also in April, Trump had conversations with Israeli President Benjamin Netanyahu about Israel holding off on military action against Iran until Trump was able to negotiate things around nuclear power. This little progress was made in conversations that they had in late April. And just a few days before Trump's ultimatum nuclear deal timeline with Iran was set to expire, Trump talked with his advisors and defense staff at Camp David. Then, the following day, had a conversation with Netanyahu again via phone call. One day after Trump's nuclear deal timeline expired, Israel then proceeded to launch attacks at Iran, stating it didn't need the US's permission to do so, which is a big statement considering the friendship between Israel and the US. While Israel continued these attacks, Trump was supposed to be attending the G7 Leader Summit in Kananaskis, but he left incredibly early for Washington, where he spent about a week in the Situation Room having talks with his defense and security staff on how to proceed with the situation with Iran. Trump warned the Israeli president prior to the strikes on Saturday the 21st. At this point in the conflict, the majority of the attacks and the physicality of this conflict were taking place between only Israel and Iran. The US had the option to stay out of this conflict, yet decided to attack anyways. What can you say? It's the Trump administration. Of course they find the need to poke their heads in other people's business. So the United States' intention behind these attacks and this entire plan to dismantle Iran of their nuclear power and ability to make nuclear weapons was to rid Iran of its ability to proceed with its ambitions and nuclear goals surrounding the production of their nuclear weapons and the advancement of these said weapons. So not only dismantle the ones they have currently, but completely destroy the progress and programs that they have for nuclear power. On Saturday, June 21st, Operation Midnight Hammer was initiated. 125 U.S. military aircraft flew 18 hours to Iran. And putting this into perspective for a second, this is millions of dollars to complete this mission or operation, whatever you want to call it. Millions upon millions of dollars to do something you didn't have to do. As someone who isn't an American taxpayer, but if I were to be an American taxpayer, I would be pissed off, to say the least. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, U.S. General Den Kane, said some jets were sent to fly over the Pacific Ocean as a decoy. Some jets flew in prior to the main bombing jets to ensure that the airspace over the sites were clear. And then 7 B-2 stealth bombers were sent into Iran to bomb the nuclear sites, hitting 2 Iranian uranium enrichment sites, Fordo and Natanz, then later the third site, a uranium conversion plant named Isfahan. Trump exaggerated the result of these strikes, saying that they were a complete obliteration of Iran's nuclear power. Even though these strikes did harm a lot of things, there's pictures on the BBC of craters in the ground from the missiles that were dropped, or the bombs that were dropped, it did little harm. And Iran's ability to create nuclear weapons within the following months will be successful because of the lack of damage. So when it comes to Iran's potential steps, and this is something from BBC journalists that they've kind of concluded about what Iran could potentially do moving forward, is either do nothing, rebuild the sites, and keep producing nuclear weapons. They could react bigger and faster, which is more inefficient considering the fact that Iran is poorer, smaller, far away. It's probably not the best decision on their part to do that, but I mean, I don't know. And number 3 is delay their retaliation to another time of their choosing and convenience. And I think that probably is the scarier option out of all of them, because delaying that reaction will be harder to predict. And again, following the strikes, Trump's proposition to Iran was made in a format that he loves to use, social media. He stated that Iran needs a regime change, posting on social media saying that, quote, if the current Iranian regime is unable to in all caps, by the way, make Iran great again, why wouldn't there be a regime change? Why is that his business? The global reaction to these strikes kind of follows most people's reaction to the strikes. European powers like the UK, France, and Germany stressed that Iran shouldn't have nuclear power and is urging Iran to enter talks with the US and other countries. The UN Secretary General stated that this move was dangerous and further escalated a conflict that did not need to be escalated in any way, shape, or form. And even Trump's best friend, Vladimir Putin, said that the US violated international rules. I guess it takes one to know one, right? But that's insane seeing Vladimir Putin say that about him, because they're all buddy-buddy and up each other's ass and whatever. But I mean, coming from Vladimir Putin, he's pointing it out because he's done it himself. So, again, takes one to know one. So that is kind of what's happening with the US-Iran conflict. Obviously, with global affairs, they're ever-changing. Especially with Trump, it's ever-changing. So when this is posted, there'll probably be like 25 more changes that I could make to this, but that's just a general overview of how that conflict started. Now I want to talk about Bill C-5. I want to talk about what it is, the purpose, and what Indigenous communities are saying about it. So Bill C-5 is now named the One Canadian Economy Act, and it's a piece of legislation, a part of the bigger Building Canada Act proposed by the Liberal Party. Kind of some background on the Building Canada Act. It authorizes the federal government to designate certain infrastructure or resource projects as national interest projects. So it streamlines and kind of rushes their approval. And then once listed, approvals under various federal laws are deemed granted and subject to conditions set by the responsible minister. And then it also requires nationwide consultations from the provinces, territories, Indigenous right holders, and treaty leaders to define criteria such as sovereignty, economic benefit of these projects, environmental and climate objectives, and Indigenous inclusion for selecting such projects. Its purpose overall is to remove internal trade and labor mobility barriers, and then fast-track federal approval of select national interest projects, potentially reducing environmental checks and Indigenous approvals to more administrative conditions. So removing federal barriers to interprovincial trade movement of goods, services, and workers. In last episode, I talked about how that was a really strong liberal policy that they were pushing for, to have more interprovincial trading and free trade, as well as have certificates across all provinces and territories equal the same thing. Its purpose also accepts that if a provincial or territorial standard is met, it's considered to meet equivalent federal requirements, and this also grants the governor and council the authority to define and regulate remaining federal barriers. Indigenous communities have a lot to say about this bill. And taking what I talked about in last episode, the Liberals have pushed to have a further and better communication and relationship with Indigenous communities in Canada, but they're not really having a great start. Leaders and analysts argue that the bill undermines constitutional obligations, especially towards free, prior, and informed consent around this bill, and offering consultation but potentially no real veto power over this bill. APTN is an Indigenous news outlet, and they wrote an article coming to a consensus that this bill was rushed through the House. A Mi'kmaq Senator, Paul Prosper, did not outright oppose this bill, but instead he suggested amendments that grew from concerns addressed by multiple Indigenous leaders, stating that the bill doesn't fully incorporate and protect Indigenous rights. Prosper said that Indigenous people don't want to sit around while other Canadian politicians make the decisions. Quote, "We want to be at the table, making decisions alongside Canadian politicians, because these decisions affect us. They affect our lands and resources." On top of opposition from Indigenous politicians, the Senate received testimonies from 3 Indigenous leaders. National Chief Cindy Woodhouse Nipinak from the Assembly of First Nations, Inuit Tapiriit Kanatami President Nathan Obed, and Manitoba Métis Federation President David Chartrand. They all discussed the negative environmental consequences of fast-tracking this bill, saying that Indigenous people are not against modern development. And I think that's a consensus across the board, that Indigenous communities are not concerned about development in certain areas, but that they have serious concerns over the integrity of Indigenous rights to land, treaty, water, and environmental rights. Because when this bill was rushed through House, even though the Liberals promised that Indigenous communities would get a voice, they barely did. And so that is the main upset and frustration with this bill already receiving royal assent, which in Canada just means that it is now law, that they were not included in conversations that they were promised to be included in. So that's Bill C-5. And now for the last current event I want to talk about is the No Kings protest. The No Kings protest was one of the biggest single-day protests in American history. Held on June 14th, 2025, which is also Flag Day in the US, coinciding with President Trump's 79th birthday and a military parade in Washington, D.C. celebrating the U.S. Army's 250th anniversary. This day is a nationwide day of defiance against what protesters described as authoritarian, king-like tendencies in Trump's second presidency, especially because of his use of military symbolism, immigration crackdowns, and democratic backsliding. Branded No King's Day, this movement aimed to assert that American democracy belongs to the people, not a ruler. And this is a gathering not to further feed the fire that is Trump's ego, but to build a movement that rules him out completely. I got a lot of my information from the No Kings website, and they stated that the flag does not belong to the president. Instead, it belongs to the people. This movement is committed to have nonviolent action, even though during this protest there were a couple arrests made, and there were a couple of moments of violence. But as an organization, they are committed to having nonviolent action. Data journalists calculated the overall turnout at around an estimated 4 to 6 million people, or 1.2 to 1.8% of the population. These numbers could beat the historical record turnout for another protest against Trump called the Women's March back in 2017. And for the No Kings March, there were 820 locations these protests took place across the United States. So what does this protest show us about the current societal opposition to the current political game in the United States? And I have 3 main points. So first is the anti-authoritarian sentiment. The slogan No Kings reflects a growing concern that the US leaders are no longer serving their people, but rather elevating themselves and only benefiting themselves. Protesters are resisting the idea of any one figure, like Trump, becoming a long-term untouchable force in politics, which seems Trump has that in his head already. That's what he wants. That's what he's fighting for in this presidency. And there's a lot of social resistance to this. Again, going back to my quick news point about Candace Owens resisting this. It is a problem. It's happening in front of us. And the only way to resist this is active change. And that's one of the points brought up in the No Kings protests. Number 2 is the youth-led political awakening. So young people like myself, especially Gen Z, are increasingly taking to the streets. This protest highlights how the younger generation is rejecting both major political parties and demanding a strong structural change, as well as climate action, racial justice, trans rights, and a stronger democracy as a whole. And the number 3 is frustration with the institutions. This protest reflects deep mistrust in political institutions like the Supreme Court, Congress, and the president. Issues like the rollback of abortion rights, lack of gun control, and attacks on LGBTQ rights or immigration rights have made people feel that traditional avenues for justice are failing them. The No Kings protest is not just about one politician. It's more of a snapshot or an insider of a broader crisis in American democracy. People are fed up with performative politics and want transformative change, and they want it now. I saw a lot of posts on social media about this protest. I follow this one girl. I don't know her last name. Her name's Devin. She used to work at BuzzFeed, but she held up a sign during the No Kings protest that said, "Carolyn Levitt's ugly." I don't think I've talked about this enough. I fucking hate Carolyn Levitt. She's annoying. Oh my god, I could ramble for days. I'm not going to. But I saw a lot of active protesters on my social media, and as a Canadian, I kind of just had to sit back. But I was also kind of admiring the strength and uprising of the want for change and democracy in the American people, and I think that is something that was incredible to see all over my social media on June 14th and past as well. Well, that was your current event episode for today. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Project Honesty. You can check us out on social media. Our Instagram is project_honesty24. Our TikTok is project.honesty. Our website is linked in our Instagram bio, and we are available for listening on Spotify and YouTube. If you enjoy listening to Project Honesty, share us with friends and family, and you can direct them to the Spotify, YouTube, Instagram, website, or TikTok to help them learn more. Subscribe, follow, and click the bell icon for updates when I post. And remember, the more listeners, the bigger the family.